Because a lot of people say, well, why didn't you fight him off? Why didn't you run?
To go where? To stand in the street? Then where would you go? What would you do? I had no profession. I had no money. It's embarrassing that you're so afraid. It's embarrassing that you don't have nerve enough to leave. People don't understand.
A lot of people are also stupid.
Mitzi, how about this expression? Does it fit you that you wanted to play the game, but you didn't want to wear the uniform?
So don't ask me those questions. That would be my response.
Okay, maybe I wanted to wear the uniform, but I didn't want to play the game. I don't know how to play games.
I'm tired of that language. I'm tired of having to answer basic, mundane questions.
Did he fully rape you?
It's not my fault you're stupid.
It's
not my fault you can't think bigger.
He threw me down, he pinned me to the ground, and like I said, I was screaming, and he said, shut up, and I said, no.
It's not my fault you can't put yourself in the shoes of someone who's been terrorized repeatedly.
Because everybody, when they talk to me about this, say this must be very distressing for you.
Were there times during the 20 years where you thought, I'm going to break my silence?
And the one thing it isn't is distressing. The last 20 years have been distressing, where I've not been allowed to speak, where I've not been validated, and being able to now see that I wasn't mad, that this was wrong. What I couldn't deal with, what I had no equipment for, was to deal with the legal system.
Were there times during the 20 years where you thought, I'm going to break my silence, I'm going to come forward?
Nope.
Why?
Essentially I'd gone to the parents to say, somebody's done something bad, and there was no recourse.
Nope.
And that was really shocking and very frightening to discover that
the language and media,
the law couldn't help me.
It was not anywhere close to where it needed to be.
It was one of the most important nights of the Me Too movement. Hollywood's biggest stars wearing black.
And the black stupid clothes that the stupid men wore.
To rail against the system that allegedly allowed sexual misconduct to fester for decades.
And I knew they were going to trot the activists out there for PR.
It was the entire system, and the system essentially protected that. Because if you have the power and the money to create agreements that cover up essentially a very serious, in this case...
This is an international rape factory.
I dread to imagine, what other things are being covered up.
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Secretary, is it policy of the U.S. government to reward companies that traffic in women and little girls? That's my first question. My second question...
How adorable they are. Each time I see a little girl of 5 or 6 or 7, I can't resist a joyous urge to smile and say, thank heaven.
I watched President Bush deliver a moving speech at the United Nations.
Thank heaven for little girls.
In which he mentioned the crisis of the sex trade.
4 little girls get bigger every day.
The president called for the punishment of those involved in this horrible business.
And I knew they were going to trot the activists out there for PR.
Thank heaven for little girls. They grow up in the most delightful way.
But at the very moment of that speech, DynCorp was exposed for having been involved in the buying and selling of young women and children.
Those little eyes so helpless and appealing.
And what was Mia's reaction when she found out about Suni?
What happened was crazy behavior that became, terrible rage.
Thank heaven for little girls.
Death threat.
Thank heaven for them all, no matter where, no matter who. Without them, what would little boys do?
She accused me of child molestation.
Thank heaven for little girls.
Well, how do you explain the fact that DynCorp and its successor companies have received and continue to receive government contracts?
They're generally not barred in perpetuity.
This company was never in the penalty box. If you could proceed to my second question, please.
The second question, I've forgotten what the second question was.
I think Ms. Jonas knows it.
Okay.
Did you assume that those relationships were consensual?
I don't know how to attack a producer and grab him by the throat at a cocktail party and say, give me that part or else, or I'll do anything for that part. I never did any of that. You took me for what I was.
You know, you had top agents, top movie stars, male and female, coming in hourly for meetings. This was his place of business.
There were people there set up to help him rape. This is how it went, this is what it was. People, women, girls would be said, oh, you have a meeting or come to a party. They would show up and that party was just him.
There were obviously some women who were reluctant to come. You know, when you'd ring up to try and make a meeting, they'd always come up with excuses, and Harvey would get very angry and threatening and would threaten, you know, you personally, that you had to make sure that this meeting happened. With Harvey, there was no such word as no, and I think that's really the crux of the matter. I had one warning, and I have to say that woman really saved my honour, because actually being warned is very important because it armed you. And all she had said to me was, always sit in an armchair, don't ever sit on a sofa next to him, and always keep your puffer jacket on when he did start behaving badly. And it also meant that I wasn't as frightened, because I knew that it had happened to other people. So, you know, I was very robust in the way that I dealt with it. I did warn people that he had a habit of behaving inappropriately, but that they were safe, because I had always been safe. And I genuinely never was physically threatened by him, emotionally and psychologically, constantly, but never physically. He didn't have a very original repertoire, you know, but it was a system that worked. You know, massages, inappropriate suggestions, expecting people to work with him, you know, unclothed.
And it came to a head for you when he sexually assaulted, attempted rape on your colleague?
Yes. We were at the Venice Film Festival and he tried to rape her. She was extremely distressed. She was shaking, very distressed, clearly in shock. Didn't want anybody to know, was absolutely terrified of the consequences, what would happen.
So you accused him of attempted rape?
Yeah.
Essentially?
Yeah.
And he denied it?
Yes.
And then
he said nothing at all had happened. And he swore on the life of his wife and his children, which was his best get out of jail card that he used quite a lot.
And did it ever cross your mind that he might be telling the truth?
No. Not if you saw the girl that I had just seen.
I would have night terrors. I would sweat through to the mattress and inch down into the mattress. I would wake up screaming. This went on for years.
You were prepared to go that far and have him locked up?
Well, it was the only route I thought there was. I mean, it was the only route, as far as I was concerned.
McGowan says after the alleged Weinstein incident, she met with a criminal attorney about pressing charges, but she was talked out of it.
I naively believed that if we went to Disney, they would be horrified and would fire Harvey or, you know, or help us with the proceedings.
She told me, you're an actress, you did a sex scene, you're done, you'll never win. And she was right. She's not wrong. You know, you will get dragged backwards, forwards and sideways through the courts, as will your family, as will your friends, as will anybody who knows anything about you. You haven't got a chance. You will be destroyed. We had no physical evidence, and ultimately it would be two under 25-year-olds women, words against Harvey Weinstein, Miramax Film Corporation, and essentially the Disney company. You know, and at 23, when you're faced with that, your own advice, you know, the advice from your own legal team is be quiet. It's quite difficult to know where to turn. There were a couple of occasions where I made attempts to circumnavigate my agreement. However, it's almost impossible for me because one of the clauses of the agreement disallows me to have a copy of it. So I don't actually have a copy of the agreement that I signed.
Why?
Because it's a smoking gun. If you have an agreement that somebody has signed that says that he will go to therapy, that he will be dismissed from his own company if anybody else makes a claim in the ensuing period. You know, that an HR policy for sexual harassment has to be brought into the company. It's pretty clear that something's wrong.
So they never let you have a copy of it? They never let you see the whole thing?
I was allowed to look at it supervised in my lawyer's office. I was not allowed to speak to a therapist, and I didn't have the energy to go on fighting. And in reality, it was not my obligation to follow up his obligation.
Your career path was ended at that point?
Pretty much, yeah.
So what did you do?
I ended up moving to Central America to train horses. My reputation was pretty suspect. I really couldn't stay in the industry at that point.
Because what happened to me behind the scenes happens to all of us in this society, and that cannot stand, and it will not stand.
Do you regret having signed the settlement?
No, it's not a factor. I didn't take money for what happened to me. I took money because it's my only way of saying, literally my only way of saying, I did not like this. I did not want this. This was not consensual. Get off me. I took money because it's my only way of saying, literally my only way of saying, I did not like this. I did not want this. This was not consensual. Get off me.